maybe while people are thinking of questions, just a reminder that there is the CEF Telecom Virtual Info Day happening tomorrow, which is looking at other DSI, other building blocks such as EID and e-signature, but has sections on how to submit a grant proposal. So anyone here interested in grant funding can consult the recordings of that session, and there will be a dedicated session on the e-invoicing grant funding of €5 million when the grants go live. So just a reminder on that.
Okay, so far it seems like the webinar was crystal clear. I'm fine with that.
We have one question.
Ah, okay.
Are there? We've sent it through on the chat. Are there any limits size of an element of syntax or any characteristics on the format? For example, max 350 text.
Okay. Looking at the types such as address, decimal, and dates. No, did I say address? I mean dates, decimal values, and codes. Those have are the possible values that are by their nature limited. But for string values, like party name or address line and stuff like that, both UBL and cross-industry invoice have no upper limits in the length of the character strings. So the syntax doesn't add those limitations. The semantic model doesn't have those limitations either. So this is something that you need to be aware of as a receiver, that you can take care of, and that you don't, causing any errors when you get a long string. Both EDIFACT and the ISO 20022 syntax bindings or syntaxes do have limitations in character length, but those are not the ones that are mandatory for the public receiver. So, yeah. Okay. Another question here. I think it was sent only to me. I can read it out loud. How to choose which element to use if they have similar meaning. For example, these two in UBL. Invoice payment terms note versus invoice note. Generally, the decision how to map this information is provided in the syntax bindings. So based on the semantic model, each element has a specific location. So this question that you raised is something, a typical question that the editors of the syntax bindings would have to decide on. But for implementation of the European norm, these are already taken care of. Another situation would be if you are implementing UBL or cross-industry invoice from scratch in your community, then you would have to take these decisions yourself on how to semantically map a specific business term. But the syntaxes do have definitions and guiding material, so hopefully you would find the specifications to be providing that information for you so that you can make a proper syntax binding. I hope that was an okay answer to the question.
We have another one, Martin, we've just sent it through to you as well. Are enumerations in the UN CEFACT standard compliant with the invoicing expected values?
Yes, I think so. To my understanding, the code lists in the tightly bound schema version is equivalent to the ones that are to be used also with the unbounded schema version. So I think my understanding, perhaps we might need to revisit this, but my understanding is that you can apply any of the schemas and still come up with a valid, European standard invoice. Actually, this question was quite interesting. I will ask the editor of the CII syntax binding if he can give if this is true, and then I'll add that comment on the webinar webpage. For the code list, the tightly bound code list, if one potential issue with tightly bound code list could be specifically in a long-term scenario where the tightly bound code list, for example, is using a currency code list for valid currency codes, and a country is changing currency code, or a new currency is being introduced. In those cases, the standard, the European norm, we just point to the currency code list, and the new code list would be valid, but the specific schema wouldn't know about that new code value and could then invalidate invoices. So that is a reason to not use these built-in enumerations. So it's more of it could be a long-term problem.
Okay. I get the impression there that people have had the opportunity to ask the questions that they want on the enumerations in the UN CEFACT question. Thanks a lot, Martin, for offering to post that on the webinar page, and then also as a reminder that for all the topics that have been raised today, or the questions we just had in the Q&A, anything else, there is also the eInvoicing user community on CEF Digital website, which is a space where these kind of discussions can be carried on. The contact details of the CEF eInvoicing team, as well as all the key URLs and links, are provided on the slides, which we made available immediately after this webinar. I don't know, Martin, if there's anything you have left to add at this point.
No.
Okie dokie. Then I say we can wrap it up here. And I guess we all have impending deadlines, etc. So thanks a lot to everyone who joined us this morning. The recordings, as ever, will be available as per the recordings of the previous sessions. Do we have another question?
Yeah, we have.
Oh, sorry, we have one. We have two more questions.
Okay.
Could you please clarify the difference between the three technical specifications for the two listed syntaxes? That's one. I'll let you answer that one, and then there's another one.
Could you please clarify the differences between the three technical specifications and the two listed syntax? I need to follow up this question. What technical? probably used the word technical specifications many times today. So which technical specifications specifically are we referring to? Is it the syntax bindings, EDIFACT, UBL, and CII syntax bindings? Or what specifications are we referring to? Can we get the one answering, questioning this to clarify?
We have them. We're just sending them through now. Thanks, Gianluca, for sharing them.
Okay, so the three syntax bindings. Yeah, the syntax bindings point, as I showed you, this for each business term in the model, exactly where that element should be mapped to the specific syntax, and so we have three of these specifications: one for UBL, one for EDIFACT, and one for cost-industry invoice. So these are useful when implementing these syntaxes, but only two of them are mandatory for the public entities. EDIFACT can be used, but it's not mandated. So that is the differences between UBL, CII, and EDIFACT in that sense. Yeah. So and each syntax binding then only each syntax binding specification only is handling that specific syntax. So there's no mention of EDIFACT in the UBL syntax binding and vice versa. So they are standalone in that sense. I hope that answers the question.
And there was another question we sent it through as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you have it. Yeah.
Can XSDs be amended to suit one needs, or validations are carried out externally? I think this is depending what you refer to with amended. You can download the XSDs. You can deploy them locally or on premise, wherever your solution is, and validate. So it doesn't have to be validation. Doesn't have to be external to your solution. It can be. There are validation services which can be used for validation externally, but it doesn't have to be. So that is internal versus external. But when it comes to amend the XSDs, what you can do, if you want to use European standard, is to have a subset of the XML schema. Perhaps you can create that to have a more simple set where only the elements that are relevant for you are included. Because the important thing is that every invoice message that you create must be compliant to the standard and the schemas. So you could essentially filter out all the elements that are not used in the European standard, and that would still not have any consequences on compliance. But if you by amendment mean that you change something, change data type on an element or add an extra element, change order or cardinality and so on, then you are extending the schema, and if you then are using any of those extensions that you made, that invoice wouldn't be compliant to European standard. So that is something that is a big no-no in approach. So any modifications of schemas would have to be in a way that the invoices being produced are compliant. And if you are a receiver, then of course it's important that you are also not invalidating invoices that are compliant to the standard. So if your schema would be amended so that it only allows for a handful of elements, that wouldn't be okay, of course. Okay, so an example of an amendment, I assume, would be to include field length. I understand this, your question as an example is to include sizes. That would be the character lengths, maximum character lengths. That would be, as an issuer, I guess you can include restrictions on in your schema to make sure that you're not sending too long character strings. But as a receiver, you would, as a public entity, you cannot really apply these restrictions unless, and this is another subject, perhaps, and even a subject for a separate webinar, but the European norm allows for something called the Core Invoice Usage Specification, or CIUS. I'm sure many of you have heard about the CIUS concept, which allows for further restrictions of the norm. If you are following specific rules on how to create those restrictions. In that case, you could apply restrictions, but this should be used with very, very carefully, of course, because you might end up having your own CIUS, which no one out there in the wild is actually compliant to. And so that would then be a big interoperability issue if everybody would create their own CIUSs. So far, the CIUS projects that I've seen being initiated are more on either a cross-border, large-scale communities, or in some cases, country-specific CIUSs. So on that level, perhaps it could be used to restrict field lengths, but definitely not on each business partner's level. That would be, my recommendation would be to not do that.
Maybe, Martin, just a quick note on sizes there. There will be information on sizes is also forthcoming in the knowledge base being provided on CEF Digital. In addition, a video has been prepared looking at various aspects of the European standard, which includes sizes, an explanation of sort of what they are and their role in the context of the standard. So we've just shared the URL to the CEF eInvoicing video and infographics. Maybe this is a nice sort of bit of ancillary information.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Okay. Sort of last orders at 11 in the morning. No. Okay. Okay. Well, from our side, then that's everything. Thanks for joining, and we look forward to carrying on these discussions on the registration page and on the eInvoicing user community.
Thank you very much, and thank you for the very interesting questions. And I'll be following up the one on the code list validation as soon as possible. So